Howdy folks, old Buster coming to you again. Got another story for you. This one's entitled The Captain. The Captain, as we call him, old Captain. I just want to remind you that a lot of these stories have information that has research in it that tells you about the places and what they do, all kinds of things, photographs, everything. And I can't put them on this video. So if you will email me at busterandtheboys@yahoo.com, I will send you all of them on Transfer Big Files is the name of the service that I have. I pay for every month. And it lets me send you up to 20 gigabytes of information. But I'll send you all the stories, and I'll send you all the videos. That's the original stories. And if you want them, if you don't, that's okay. I don't even, to be honest with you folks, I don't even know if anybody reads these things. But anyway, I'm reading them, and when I get done with them, well, I guess we'll be done. But I told the folks, the friends and family, that I'd put these in there, and we're going to get them done. All right, this is the Captain. Tin Hut. Well, Jesse had them boys standing tall, I tell you. Jesse was made a captain in the ROTC at the University of Alabama, where he went to take up lawyering. Now, the boys Buster, Walter, and Hired went up to see Jesse as a surprise on a Saturday, and when they found out where he was, well, they seed him a drilling some fellers for the Army. Well, when Jesse seed the boys, he dismissed the fellers he was a-drilling and come over to say howdy and was plumb pleased and tickled pink to see 'em all. Said he was right surprised. Well, Walter asked Jesse what in the world he was a-doing. None of 'em knowed he was a captain a-doing Army work. Well, that's when Jesse told him he just took it up not long ago and got promoted real quick for helping the colonel get his budget in line and started making money for his unit at the school from the Coke machine fund, they called it. Actually, it was a lubricating cream for the guns that started making the money. It was kind of like a combination of Little Dove's Wonder Cream, Udder Balm, Mother of Nature's Gift of Youth, and the cream Jesse made up for Leonard's hands for boxing. Jesse, he throwed in a mite of white grease to boot, and when they slathered it on the working parts of any gun, they didn't jam up or rust up or nothing. Well, that old colonel was pretty darn sharp and even fixed it so that him and Jesse got a part of the profits from the concoction. Well, Jesse said they called it AWL 405. Well, Jesse said he was going to make up a batch of something he called AEL 409 too, and all the boys was always in his and deals as they know. They all just might make $1 on these here products or two. Well, Buster told Jesse he was a-thinking right smart again, and they appreciated him putting them in. Well, Hired chimed in and said if and there was any startup cost to take it out of the accounts they all had together. Well, all the boys was a-wondered what that AWL and AEL stood for, and Jesse told them it was right simple in his and mine. AWL was for Army Weapons Lubricant, and 405 was for the four of them, and 5 was them 4 plus the colonel, and AEL was for Army Electronics Lubricant, and 409 was for the 4 of them, and the 9 deals they had a-going. Well, they had Little Dove's Wonder Cream, Mother Nature's Gift of Youth, that IBM stock, that Walmart stock, Old McBrayer whiskey, that's Microsoft stuff, Winders they called it, the Army Weapons Lubricant and Army Electronics Lubricant, and Ultimate Sports Cream that they got for Leonard for his hands in them boxing, that he is just getting put out from where he made it up for Leonard. Whew, man, that's a lot of stuff, Buster said. Well, Jesse told him, too, that he put up $100,000 with Leonard for that Winders deal Leonard let him in on with Bill Gates and Paul Allen that they called the Microsoft. He also had the notion to get with Valvoline and Ashland Chemical that are a division of the Ashland Oil Company. Well, Jesse figured this was going to be pretty big since he could see it going into the automobile industry as well as the sports field. Well, the boys all went to Jesse's place and let him change, and then they went to supper for catfish and barbecue at an all-you-can-eat buffet called Catfish Heaven there in Tuscaloosa. Well, Jesse figured Buster was about to cave in, so he'd better fill his tank while he had the chance, because he'd be eating again before midnight, that's for sure. Well, whilst they was a-visiting, Buster told Jesse he done got him a new handle, Capt'n. He said he reckoned that he was the captain of their ship, and with all of his wheeling and a dealing. Well, I'd wonder why in the world Jesse wanted to be a lawyer when he done so good with business. Well, Jesse said it was business since you always needed a lawyer for it. He figured you'd just be one, to be one up on the competition, and could know what all was going on when doing business. He could also take care of their own legal doings and all the business they had, and would get into later on. Well, Walter said that was right smart of him, but didn't his and folks, especially his Uncle Cecil, want him to work for Sonat? Well, Jesse said yep, and Uncle Cecil would be right put out over it, but he just wasn't going to go that route. He had his own thoughts of what he wanted to do, and was just going to do just that. Come here, or well, anyhow, I won't say that, but it could hair lip ugly ape, I guess, but he's still going to do it. When he's stubborn and headstrong, you know. The boys all know that was for sure, because when Jesse, the captain, made up his mind, that was just how it was going to be. Anyhow, the boys asked Jesse all about his schooling, and Jesse told them he was doing right well, and met up some nice fellers and gals, and they was good folk. Well, about that time, this here feller come into the restaurant looking for Jesse. The feller spied Jesse and come over to the table and told Jesse he had to talk to him private-like. Well, Jesse told him these boys was his best friends and wasn't no secrets from them. Well, Jesse introduced the feller as Daka, a schoolmate of his. Daka was a tribal chief from Zambia, Africa. Well, Daka told Jesse he had a serious problem back home and had to leave as soon as he could, and could he help him out about his classwork and belongings when he left. Well, Jesse told him sure enough if he wanted to, and they could all go back to his place and talk it over. Well, Buster just had to eat some bread pudding, so he had the waitress put a double order in a gold bag for him to take with him. Well, when they all got to Daka's apartment, Jesse asked Daka what all he wanted him to do, and told him that with the boys they could get it all done real quick. Well, Daka said he was going to have to get on back home real fast, as there was some fellers trying to take over his village and overthrow the president too. Even as young as he was still the chief of the village and had to go tend to it. It all depended on him, he said. But this was a rebel gang that come out of some other African nation like the Somalia, backed by the communists and them being Muslims and all. His country just couldn't let him get a toehold in his village, because their next step was to take over the country and whack the president. Them rascals was mean as snakes, he said. Daka said the president wanted him to get his village all set to defend itself, which wasn't going to be no problem, but he needed to be there. They going to follow him, the chief. Now, the main thing was he was going to need folks he could trust and could keep things running smooth like whilst they run them rebels to ground. The American government was asked to help out, but they couldn't do it, whereas it looked like they was trying to use an excuse to set up shop in Africa. So it had to be on the QT. That's, nobody knowing it. Well, Buster said to let him make a call, and sure enough, it was to Mr. Holmes. When they reached Mr. Hiram Holmes, he was buying a new cigar humidor for his cigars he liked to smoke when his wife wasn't watching him. Yep, man. He come to dearly love a snort of old McBrayer too, and plumb forgot that scotch he used to drink. He kept in touch with Aunt Judith, and she seed to it that he got a case of old McBrayer every blue moon. Of course, Elizabeth had come back to the mansion in McBrayer Springs when Walter's sisters went back to the ranch, and they stayed in touch then. The ladies was doing well too, and kept everything a-running smooth like, but enjoyed their trip to the old country and seeing their people. Well, Mr. Holmes told the boys it was all under control, and to tell Daka that he would be getting help when he got there. Dalton and Devane was on their way. You didn't get no better than them. Well, Doc thanked the boys and told Jesse he would be back next semester if everything went all right. Well, summer vacation was in a week, and Doc would be excused for his last test and could make them up over the summer when he got back. The school made an exception for him because of his situation. Now, the boys outpacked and get Doc on his way and then went to Jesse's to spend the night. Well, the next day was Sunday, and the boys had to get on back as usual because there was a story to tell there for sure. Now, on Sundays, you know, their ma's going to make sure they in the church house. That's all there is to it. Well, Jesse said he'd see them about a week when school let out. Well, the captain seed the boys off that afternoon, and the boys lit out for the house as they had chores and a gal or two awaiting. The following week, the captain come in from school, and all the boys got together and snuck off to the bayou for some fishing. Well, the captain said he ain't heard from nothing from Doca, and none of the other boys had heard from Mr. Holmes neither. But down there on the bayou, fishing was good. They was having a right good time. They all reckoned everything was okay over there then. Well, all the boys went to the captain's place for Sunday dinner and decided to go to Dickinson's Gospel Barn for some singing that evening, and there were some gals over there they wanted to see too. As they was about to leave, Miss McBrayer called out to Jesse that he had to feed the chickens before he left on out. Now, Jesse was in might of a hurry and didn't get the egg baskets when he come in. Well, Jesse was about to get in Buster's Ford when his and Ma hollered for him to come on back in. Well, he did, and she said she couldn't leave the dough she was a-making for bread right then and to get them egg baskets back to her. Oh, he hated gathering eggs and he hated picking corn worse than anything and shucking it worse than that. Well, Jesse told his and Ma if he couldn't do it later, and she said he might be a captain at the school, but he sure was a private there. Oh, that boy. Well, not nary word was uttered after that, but Jesse made a beeline for the chicken coop to get them egg baskets for his and Ma. Well, Jesse told Buster not to say a word, him with a grin on his face. Well, Buster had his come up at a time or two along with the rest of the boys, I tell you, from their ma's too. When they got to the dancing and singing at the barn, Walter was a-cutting the rug and a boot scooting in the middle of the floor. Folks was a-clapping and a-hooping and a-hollering, and Walter was a-strutting his and stuff. The gal he was dancing with, sure enough, was Lou Ann, and she was a-showing out about as much as Walter was. Well, Hired was a-getting punched for Alma May Snow, and the gals was all over Jesse as usual with his and pheromones a-popping out all over him when they come in. Now, the boys' paws come in a-looking for him round about then and rounded them up and told them to come with them. Well, Buster had that long, tall herring gal cornered up, and his and Grandpa Gus told him to let her loose and follow him on out. Well, that was all along for Lulu, you know. All the boys had a look of wonderment of what all was going on and excused themselves and went with their paws. Now, Mr. Ollinger told the boys to follow him on back to Buster's, that it was the closest to the dance and everybody was there. The boys was all quizzical-like and trying to figure out what all was going on, and on the way over there, they did quite a bit of ciphering. They knowed it had to be important-like, or their paws wouldn't come after them like they done. Well, when they got to Buster's Grandpa Gus's house, all their folks was there, and lo and behold, Mr. Holmes himself was there. Woo-wee, now that's something to say. Everybody said howdy and took a seat, and Mr. Holmes went to explaining the reason for his visit. Now, he wouldn't be there if it wasn't something important like, you know. Seemed like Dalton and Devane was in the thick of it with them rebels, but figured to do 'em in good fashion with the Delta Force boys and a few of the Presidential Corps fellers. Only thing was, Doc got hurt in a scuffle with a rebel. He sure enough needed his own leading his he sure enough held his own while he was leading his warriors in the tussle, but a rebel come in behind him and stuck him with a spear in his back. Now, the rebel didn't hit nothing vital, but Doc had stove up a bit for a spell. The president is off and away from the palace, and Doc's younger brother, that's Winston, is there helping to run things till one of them gets back to take over. Now, the president has to be in the thick of the fight as he is their leader and would lose respect if he wasn't leading their nation in fighting. Cultural thing, Mr. Holmes said. Thing is, Mr. Holmes got word from a source that there is a spy. That's what you call a mole in the government over there. And there is a pickle of a mess, and help is needed in the capital of Lusaka. Now, the language spoken there was English. And Nyanja, now don't ask me how to say that, Nyanja. Beats me. So a body could get by communicating there. Well, Mr. Holmes said the reason he was there was that he wanted the boys to help out DACA and the president. Huh, now boy, that's a tall one. Now he knowed that was asking a lot, but knowed he could depend on the boys and their folks to lend a hand. Well, the boys wasn't going to be in no fighting to speak of, that he knowed of, but there was things the president and DACA wanted done that only trusted people could handle. The spy had to be found out and captured, and business decisions had to be made in the interim of running the country. Now, DACA's brother Winston would be the figurehead, and they would advise and work with him till the rebels was rounded up. Now, Mr. Holmes said his people would be there, and they'd never know it, but he needed the boys there too, especially Jesse, because he was friends with DACA. Well, all of them said yes to his and asking for their help, and Jesse said that there was a lot of them nuts out there with a bad case of autism, and they would be right proud to help punch their tickets, that's for sure. Oh, me. Well, Mr. Holmes also asking if the folks wouldn't mind coming over there after all the ruckus settled down a mite to help the folks over there learn something about our ways of doing things. Now, Mr. Holmes said he'd take care of all the details with their farm and ranch and business if they would come over for a bit to help out. It wasn't that there wasn't other folks that could do the job, but since he knowed all of them and they had a history, so to speak, he would sure enough appreciate it for them to come. Just leave the details to him, he said. Well, the boys left on out on a military hop set up by Mr. Holmes late the next day to Lusaka, Zambia. They was met at the airport by Winston and a cousin of the president, Rupaya Banda, and taken to the palace. Now that old boy's name's R-U-P-I-A-H. I'm going to say Rupaya. There was DACA all decked out in his and chiefs and get up and proud as punch sitting there in his and wheelchair. He shook hands with Jesse and the boys and told them he sure enough appreciated them coming to help him. Well, all of them went to a sitting room to chew the rag, and Winston and DACA told the boys that they would like them to advise some on some sensitive matters of which they would be informed in the coming days. Well, mainly on things of a nature concerning Dalton, Devane, and the efforts of the U.S. assistance coordinated by Mr. Holmes. Kind of secret, because the people in the palace and Zambian government didn't know come from Sickle when it comes to that kind of business. So they had to keep everything low key, don't tell nobody, and just discuss this stuff about them and just kind of communicate with Dalton and Devane and Mr. Holmes. Well, reckon messages was right important, and keeping the feller's mouth shut was pretty much of it, plain and simple. Well, Jesse stayed behind with Hired. Buster and Walter went into the field to meet up with Dalton. Devane was in the bush chasing them rebels and had them holed up down around Lake Kanda, or I guess Canba, on the Zambezi River. Boy, they got some names there now. They worse than them dadgum Frenchmans. Dalton told Buster and Walter that whooping them rebels wasn't going to be no problem, but a feller they done captured told him and Devane that this ruckus was only a diversion to set up a takeover of the current president. Boy, that's an eye-opener. Banda was a good guy and a friend of the U.S., and the knuckleheads that wanted control was communist. There was some folks in the palace that figured into this and was up to no good for sure. These turncoats was going to see if they could zap Banda and take over whilst the thug rebels was kicking up a fuss. So Dalton told them to tell DACA to be on their toes, and Mr. Holmes had some folks in place to see to it there was protection for the president. Docka, and the boys. Who knows how many yahoos was in on this deal? Now, all this was probably to take place in the next week or so, and Dalton wanted all the boys to keep a sharp eye out on what was happening in the palace. Well, Dalton said to the boys that they was told to bring them watches and doodads, and then doodad, what that was, the locators they had made, if you remember, up in their watches, so they know where they are at all times. They was give, pardon me, in French Guiana. And did they have them? And they said they would. Buster and Walter showed him theirs, and Hire and Jesse had theirs on them too, and Dalton said to use them if need be. Dalton would be in and out of Lasaka, but most generally they wouldn't know it, but not to worry none. If things worked for the rebels, there was a strike force that was built up and raring ready to go out of the southern tip of Somalia, that's some Muslim communist people, with troops from China and Russia and Venezuela and Cuba. What a Duke's mixture that was, and the Muslim haters throwed in for good measure. You could see the pressure cooker could sure enough pop with all kind of international implications if they come in. A full-fledged war for sure, and the U.S. right smack dab in the middle of it. Of course, the copper mines and gem-producing mines was important to the bad guys, as control over the copper would severely impact lots of industries around the world. Now, whilst Buster and Walter was gone for a couple of days, Jesse and Docka had their heids together, and their conversations was strictly private. Now, Docka gave Jesse the lowdown on how things worked in Zambia, and the cultural aspects of family and how it played out in politics as well as daily life. Now, Docka had some ideas about who could be in the mix of all this plotting and planning, but was not for sure about it all right yet. Well, Jesse went out with Docka to his village and helped train a few of their men in U.S. military ways. He was introduced as the captain and a good friend and was to be trusted. Well, Jesse had a high old time out there, I'm telling you, and learned as much as he taught the fellers about weapons and discipline and whatnot. Now, Jesse learned a lot about military ways whilst he was at Bama, but more than just lawyering. That ROTC stood him in good stead. Now, Howard spent his time mingling with the staff and more or less advising on dealing with paperwork for the fellers that was helping out for Mr. Holmes' people he sent over. Now, whilst Howard was a sipholing around about the palace, he see the cook get a woman that was conversating with the president's cousin off to the side in an alcove in the garden. Now, Howard didn't hear much, but what he did hear made his ears perk up for sure. When the woman noticed Howard, they stopped talking and greeted him and asked if they could help him and broke up their little confab right quick like. But Howard did hear mention that the time was about right and the president would be in for a press conference day after tomorrow. Then it would be a new day for Zambia and Africa in the world. Well, Howard used his and watched to signal Dalton and the boys to tell him what he done found out and went on back to helping his communicating. Well, a feller Howard noticed that was pretty close by was a sweeping up and a cleaning in the garden and looked away as Howard walked by. That seemed kind of funny to Howard, but he figured he was just being respectful and not bothering nobody none, just doing his job. Well, Mr. Holmes called Howard when he got back to the communicating room and asked him what all he found out, and Howard told him what bits he overheard and his suspicions. Now, Mr. Holmes said to keep his eyes peeled and ears open for anything else, and to let him know immediately if he did. Now, Jesse got back in the evening, but Docka stayed at his village to help things settle down after the tussle they had. Docka was sure glad that Devane and his fellers had them rebels on the run and told Jesse he'd be back for the president's press conference. Well, Howard told Jesse all the things that was done and said whilst he was gone, whilst he was waiting for Buster and Walter to come in later on in the evening to go over everything. They had to do some palavering, you know. Well, Buster and Walter come in, showered, got cleaned up a mite, then sat down for supper with Jesse and Howard. The boys got right into the eating, and just as Howard was about to drink his and fresh squeezed fruit juice and take his and pills, a dang monkey come in through the window and grabbed his and glass and run off through the window cell there and drank down his and juice. Well, right then and there, that monkey keeled over dead as a doornail, I'll tell you. Well, the boys all looked over at each other and knowed something was afoot for sure with what all Hired had heard. They was a-trying to do in the boys a poisoning them. Well, that ended that meal, that's for sure. Well, all the boys took off to the kitchen looking for the cook, but he was nowhere to be found till they heard somebody a-holler. They all run out and see the feller a-stealing the motorcycle a-riding off. Well, Hired see the police motorcycle parked there too and run to it to go catch the cook. Well, Hired had her cranked up and was moving on when a palace guard come over to the boys and told him that with the police officer was right behind them and they was going for the car. Well, Hired knowed the feller had a little head start on him and was seeming to ride pretty good, so he took drastic measures to cut him off. First off, he got a good run at a natural ramp and jumped the wall and took on after the cook. They was a-riding like banshees through the streets and town, but the cook was a-losing ground fast. Hired was just about to catch up to the cook when he went down some steps and jumped off an embankment onto a highway out of town. He was headed for Lake Canda. The cook opened her up on the highway and Hired did too. The boys and the guard and the officer was in two cars and was a-giving chase too, but was far behind. After hitting the highway, they gave him the gas too. Well, Hired hit 180 on a straightaway and gained ground mighty quick because the cook just couldn't ride like Hired. As they come up on a switchback and a low-water bridge about 10 miles out of town, Hired seed his chance. The cook was at the water's edge and lower than Hired. Well, Hired jumped off of the road and hit the cook with his back tire, and the cook went off of the bridge into the water. Well, Hired landed off the jump and laid the motorcycle down and rode her out and then dove in after the cook. He was knocked silly and sputtering, and Hired conked him a good one and then drug him on out of the water. About that time, the boys and other fellers come up and got them all out the water and into the cars. Now, the police officer called for help to move the two motorcycles and to get an interrogation room ready to question the cook. The boys and the guard and the officer said they was a mighty fine piece of riding and they ain't never seen nothing like it, and that Hired done a great job of catching the cook. Well, they never got a chance to question the cook. Whilst they was riding back, he swallered or hollered something about Allah and kicked the bucket. He bit into a cyanide capsule, they said. He had it in his tooth, and they come to find out that and killed himself right then and there. Come to find out he's one of them Muslim eaters. When they got back to the palace, the president's cousin and the woman was gone. Nobody knowed where they was off to and had no information on who the woman was neither. Whoa, the plot thickens, I guess. All this was reported to Mr. Holmes in Dalton, and Mr. Holmes told the boys to sit tight and put on extra guards and give the boys a password code to let them know if the fellers was from him or not. Well, 4 men come up to the boys and give them the code word so they know they was sent by Mr. Holmes, and then they all left on out to eat at a local restaurant as Buster was plumb caved in, he was hungry. Now, the rest of them was too, but that dayed monkey sure took the wind out of their sails for a while when it come to eating. But the excitement died down and their bellies was a-growling. Wouldn't you know that there was a Chinese restaurant open not far from the palace, and the boys ate their fill and then went on back to bed. The guards told them they would stay with them till morning and to get some rest. Well, the next day around 10 a.m., Dalton called and told the boys that Devane and his men had done killed or captured the rebels, and that was all over with now. Now, Devane was interrogating some of the fellers right now and would share the information later on that evening. Devane was going to get the skinny on who was instigating this coup and behind all this here attempted takeover in Zambia. He said he sure enough would get to the bottom of it sooner or later, and he figured sooner. Well, in the meantime, the president and his men was scouring the countryside for any of the rebels that got away. He sent word he'd be back the next day for his press conference. He told his staff to get everything ready and he was going to tell how the cow ate the cabbage to the world. Seemed like a pretty good old boy, that president. Well, the rest of the day went right smooth, like no mishaps was to be had by anybody, and things just settled down for a bit, and it was a breather for sure after all the excitement. The press conference was set for 3 p.m. The excitement was really high around them places about that time. President Banda had been briefed on the attempted coup and given the information that was gained from interrogations by Devane. Now, DACA was getting the feeling better every day and would soon be up and at 'em. Things appeared to be getting back to somewhat normal, and everybody was a-hoping and a-praying the worst was over. Right on the dot, the president's press conference started with DACA, Winston, and all the government officials present. Special guest was behind the president, too. Danged if it wasn't Jesse, Howard, Walter, and Buster a-twisting their collars. They'd been asked to be up front with all the important folks to be available to answer any questions the press might have. Well, first off, the leader of the National Assembly gave a bit of the history of Zambia before the president spoke. Zambia was previously known as the territory of Northern Rhodesia and was administered by the South Africa Company until 1891, until it was taken over by the UK in 1923. During the 1920s and 30s, advances in mining spurred development and immigration, and the name was changed to Zambia upon independence in 1964. Well, there's a whole lot going on right now with all this storytelling about Zambia, but that's in the papers here. And the new president, Banda, launched a far-reaching anti-corruption campaign in 2002, which resulted in the prosecution of the former President Frederick Chiluba and many of his people in 2003. And the opposition parties currently hold a majority of the seats in the National Assembly. Now, after recounting all this Zambian history, President Banda was introduced to the people of Zambia and press corps representing the world. And after his opening remarks, he began to tell folks all about what all was happening and was about to tell who all was responsible when he softly shouted, "You have urinated on my jacket." And paused as he looked up seeing a vervet monkey playing in a tree above his chair. Now, folks, this was in the newspapers. This is true, I'm telling you. That monkey decided to do his business on the president. Lord of mercy. Well, at that exact moment, a shot rang out and barely missed the president and put 2 holes in his suit coat when he turned and looked up at that monkey. Now, Buster jumped up and grabbed the president, throwed him on the ground, and covered him up with his own body. Now, them monkeys was all over the place, and 2 of them done got killed taking care of people. The palace guard went on bonkers then, and they ain't to say the least, and the folks scattered everywhere. But boys seed Devane grab a hold of a feller and begin to squoze him something fierce. They was about 25 to 30 yards away. Then all manner of carrying on took place. This woman come a-running up to the president and pulled a knife and was going to stab him, but DACA jumped out of his wheelchair and tackled her. Now, shooting was heard in the background, and the Zambian soldiers was a-shooting at about 20 fellers firing towards the president. One slug hit the woman dead center of the back of her head and splattered DACA with all kinds of blood and brains of hers. The fellow that Devane was a-squeezing passed out with his eyeballs about popping out of his head, but he was still alive. When all was said and done, none of the 20 rebels was left alive. Of course, if they was, they wouldn't have been left long. And only the cousin of the president was still kicking. Now, come to find out, the woman was the mother of his wife and really called the shots. Now, the president, that made her mother-in-law, I guess, the president was all right, not nary a scratch on him. Walter had been riding that day, and it wasn't no gray, but still a good horse. There was a fella that took off a-running that he seed, and he hit the saddle leather by vaulting into it from the rear like in the movies. He set the bay to full gallop and uncoiled his lariat. After a couple of twirls, he set that rope to sail and lassoed the feller that was running away. Now, it turned out to be the brother-in-law to the cousin of the president, and Walter drug him back a-squealing and a-hollering like a pig stuck under a gate. He settled down right smart when the president swatted him real good. Oh, have mercy. Oh, well, Jesse told Walter that he done got the last of the nimnuts with autism, and with them two in custody, things really did settle down, and the president continued on with his press conference. It was a doozy, I tell you. The whole world was watching. Well, after the questioning was over, and the two that tried to kill the president, Mr. Holmes got everybody together and told him about his conversation with government officials from the U.S. and Zambia. The president wanted the folks of the boys to be his guests and to help his people and train them up in ways they know to work, one farmer and rancher to another. Well, Jesse got to review all the Zambian soldiers, and that hit world news. Well, Buster Jesse, Howard and Walter got medals for what they done and was made citizens of Zambia too. Buster also got him a ceremonial outfit complete with spear for jumping atop the president when the shooting started. Well, Dalton and Devane stayed out of the spotlight as usual. The Delta Force men and Presidential Corps fellers just vanished when the fighting was over, like they was never there. The justice of the Zambian law was swift, and the cousin and brother-in-law was hanged at high noon the day after the attempt on the president's life and takeover of the government. The folks of the boys come over and was treated like royalty, but soon told the president they wanted to be treated just like normal folk, like they was. That endeared them to the people even more. Well, Dawkins Village was the headquarters for their stay, and everybody learned some things to benefit them all and made a passel of new friends. The president had the Mundawanga Botanical Gardens to remove all the monkeys on the State House grounds. There's about 200 of them. Of course, the president sure was appreciative of the fact that the monkey done his business when he did, or he would have had his and goose cooked for sure when he was shot at. Other than having to buy a new suit coat, he was just fine. Now, Mr. Fred Hengeveld, he was the head knocker of the garden, said they done caught up 61 of the critters, and they was to be treated real good. The monkeys were going to be relocated and released back into the wild where they come from. Everybody know they'd come back though. Oh, free eats around that palace. Now, after everybody had done got back to the house and back to normal, Mr. Holmes and Dalton Devane had a little set-tea with the boys and the folks. Well, Mr. Holmes thanked the folks for taking the time to help out the folks in Zambia, and especially Dawkins Village. But this was the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. A feller named Heinrich Meyer and the Illuminati was behind the doings in Zambia, especially the Rothschild bunch. Heinrich was the son of Helmut. If y'all remember him, Mr. Holmes said, of course they did. The IGF, that's the Intergalactic Federation, took him out in Venezuela with Chavez. The double for Chavez is the puppet for the Illuminati and is running the government in Venezuela for him. Now, fact is, information was gathered that told him that Heinrich was on the Isle of Man. You know, that's where them four-horned sheep is from, and the cat with no tail, and the fainting goats. From there, it was reported that old Heinrich was on Inishmurray. I don't know, some kind of island, officially part of Sligo. It's an uninhabited island, has a Christian monastic ruins, and has somewhat a mystical reputation. A bit tricky, even dangerous, to put a boat into doing to the rocky coastline, though. But that turned out to be a day late and $1 short of where the rascal really was. He's on Stroma. That's an island on the northern coast of the Scottish mainland. It is the more southerly of the two islands, situated in the Pentland Firth between the Orkney Islands and Caithness. And we got a whole lot about that over there. And it's like I say, if you folks just write me, I'll send it all to you. You'll have all the information about Stroma and where they're hiding out and all that stuff. Well, old Heinrich Meyer and the Illuminati have bought off Mr. James Simpson, who used this island for a hideout till they get themselves a plan for more devilment. And they said, Mr. Holmes, we just got to stop them before they do more harm. Well, Mr. Holmes told the boys that they was the only ones that knowed what old Heinrich looked like. The boys asked how in the world were they the ones that knowed what he looked like. Well, Mr. Holmes had to take them back to where they met a German feller about 24 with old Fritz in the meeting in the back room of Harry's bar when they was in French Guiana. The boys all said they remembered that night for sure. Well, that young feller was Heinrich, and all the boys had a good eye for detail, but especially Jesse, and they come up with a description of the feller. He's about 6'1" or 6'2", around about 175, 80 pounds, seemed to be in good shape, blonde hair and blue eyes. He had a scar on the left side of the cheek, not like a knife done it, but like a piece of barbed wire cut him, and a tattoo of a devil's pitchfork behind his right ear. Now, Mr. Holmes said he needed boys to go with Dalton and Devane and make sure they got that feller this time for proper. Enough said, they's going. Well, you know how it is with all them people and all them folks, they all got a palaver about that, but you know them boys is going. Well, this part was short and sweet, nothing like in the movies. The boys got on the island, pretended to be fellers taking care of James Simpson's sheep he done left there. Well, in the meantime, Mr. Holmes had taken the precautions to stop any of them from escaping. There weren't any way off the island excepting by air or sea. Wasn't no other way neither. No cars get on there. There was only a handful of guards with Heinrich, and all of them was huddled up in the lighthouse for a headquarters. Now, the Presidential Corps, their folks took out all the guards in short order in the firefight, but Heinrich and one of the Rothschild boys was out in a Range Rover when the team hit them. They lit a shuck out of there trying to reach a high-powered military-type boat to make a getaway. Well, the boys and Devane and Valton took after them in an SUV and a truck that was at the lighthouse and run them to ground. They ended up at the Gloop, G-L-O-U-P, Gloop, whatever that is. We'll find out, I reckon. Well, it wasn't much for shooting, and it come down to hand. Now, Devane, he took on Heinrich, and Buster jumped out and went after that Rothschild feller. Now, the boy must have been a bodybuilder or some kind of weightlifter, because he was sure enough bowed up and just a mite bigger, just a sight bigger than Buster. But not stouter, I tell you. Now, it was a tussle for sure. Devane plumb wore out old Heinrich, whooping up on him. Heinrich just wasn't no match for Devane. Not many men were. Now, Buster, on the other hand, had a mite of a time at first with that Rothschild boy, because he was real trained up in some kind of martial arts. But Buster could handle himself right proud, and in a one-on-one tussle, he could show him a thing or two about country fighting. And Buster was tough, too, and could take a lick. Now, Buster waded into that Rothschild boy and took a few good licks to get him where he wanted him, and when he did, it was all over but the shouting and the fat lady singing. Buster got the boy by the throat and pretty near tore off his, and hey, when he bear hugged him, you could hear the ribs crack. That feller was a swatting at Buster, but Buster had done got mad about all them shenanigans and had enough of them hurting people. They ain't supposed to do that. You know, them boys live by two words, do right. And these people ain't doing right. Well, old Heinrich, he started to run in from Devane and was on the edge of the Gloop when Buster raised the Rothschild boy over his and hay and throwed him again Heinrich. Well, both of them went over the edge into the Gloop and down into the Swilky Whirlpool. Now, this is a place in the ocean that had like a whirlpool, sucked them all the way down and all that. Ain't no way anybody survived it. And there wasn't no surviving it for them two, neither. Both the bodies were recovered 4 days later as the currents took them out to sea, and they floated to the top. Well, Jesse muttered to himself that there went a couple of more of them nuts with autism that bit the dust. There was 2 more that the world didn't have to deal with, and good riddance. Into that part of the story. Well, Mr. Holmes and Dalton and Devane met all the folks and the boys about 2 weeks later at Buster's grandma's house. And it was a right serious talk. Mr. Holmes said they was going to keep the boys out of any reports and would never tell they was on tracking, in on it, tracking down old Heinrich Meyer and Anton Rothschild. That was the two fellers' names. That was the other feller's name, was old Anton Rothschild. He was sure worried to all of them that the boys could be a target for the Illuminati, especially for Buster, since he throwed old Anton over the cliff. Boy didn't know his own strength. Well, Mr. Holmes said he was going to be extra careful and have some of his people keep an eye out for the boys. Well, about that time, Walter's Uncle Jeff come in and said he was sorry he was late. Mr. Holmes said they'd be seeing more of him and had him transferred to his command to see that the boys and the folks were took care of. Well, after all the rattling and the jabbering, Buster said it was time to eat. There was some victuals there fit for a king, and Bill Kimmel's Aunt Penny finally give up her dumpling recipe at 94, and they was having them, and his and Grandma's plum dumplings too, plus all manner of good eats. Now, Mr. Holmes said he couldn't wait and hated for the table to eat and beat Buster. Lord have mercy. You know all them women folk could cook. Piled high was pan-fried chicken. Buster's grandma rung a few eggs that morning. Smoked ham that Grandpa Gus sugar cured and hickory smoked his himself. Mashed taters, sweet tater casserole, fresh sliced tomatoes, corn on the cob, fried okra, sauerkraut, turnip greens with pepper sauce, lime jello salad with pecans and cottage cheese and pineapple, gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce, salad, and with no stobs in it neither, just real lettuce. That's iceberg. For dessert, there was pecan, lemon, and coconut pie, with hand-churned homemade ice cream and fried peach pies, and there was an extra dozen made for Buster. There was grins on both Dalton and Devane's faces as they took out after him. Oh, plumb forgot the pork roast. That's something else they had there. Later, when school started again to fall, Doc had come back and looked in on Jesse. But Doc had told him all his people sure missed all of them and wanted them to come back real soon. He said they was using what all was taught to them by the folks and was doing right well. Well, Doc handed over a package to Jesse and told him to open it. Well, round about that time, Walter, Hire, and Buster all come in to see what all Jesse got from Doc. Doc said it was a present from the president. Well, Jesse opened the package and his mouth opened up so wide he was going to swallow flies if he didn't watch out. In the package was a full dress uniform with the rank of captain for the Zambian army. Well, I reckon from now on, Jesse was sure enough the captain. Them boys. Well, you folks be on the lookout for another story coming soon. And y'all have a blessed day.